I never should have rented that cabin for New Year's. Eva listing said secluded mountain getaway and showed pictures of a cozy interior with a stone fireplace. But what it didn't mention was that the nearest neighbor was 8 miles down. A dirt road that turned to mud when it rained, and it had been raining for 3 days straight. My phone lost signal about an hour into the drive up, right around the time the GPS started showing me roads that didn't exist anymore. And by the time I finally found the place nestled in a hollow between 2 ridges, the sun was already setting. On December 31st, 2024, the cabin looked exactly like the photos, which should have been comforting, but something about the proportions felt wrong in person. The windows were smaller than they appeared in the pictures, and the tree line pressed so close to the back wall that branches scraped against the logs whenever the wind picked up. The key was under the mat, just like the owner said it would be, and the door swung open with a creak that echoed wrong in the silence. Inside, everything was clean and organized, too organized, like someone had arranged it all and then left in a hurry. There was a note on the kitchen counter in shaky handwriting. "Don't go outside after midnight. Happy New Year." I laughed it off, as the owner trying to add some local flavor. Some Appalachian ghost story charm for the tourists. The afternoon passed slowly. I unpacked my bags, started a fire in the stone fireplace, tried to read a book I'd brought, but I kept glancing at my phone out of habit, even though there was no signal. The silence was profound in a way that city dwellers can't really understand. Not peaceful, but heavy, like the mountains themselves were holding their breath. Around 8 p.m., I noticed the clock on the mantel. It was one of those old analog clocks with ornate hands, and it was running backwards. Not broken, not stopped, but actively moving counterclockwise. I checked my watch. My phone was dead by then, forgot to charge it in the car, and my watch showed 8:47 p.m. while the mantel clock showed 3:30 and going backwards. I tried to dismiss it, but the wrongness of it needled at me. I made dinner, drank some wine, tried to relax, but every time I looked at that clock, the hands had moved further backwards. By 10 p.m., it showed 11:50, and the hands were moving faster, ticking backwards, with increasing speed. The fire crackled and popped, and outside the small windows, the darkness was absolute. No stars, no moon, just black pressing against the glass like something solid. That's when I heard the first sound from outside, footsteps, heavy and deliberate, circling the cabin. Stay with me here. Keep listening, and if you're enjoying these stories, hit that subscribe button, because what happened in that cabin is only the beginning, and you need to hear how this ends. Trust me on this. The footsteps continued their circuit around the cabin, and I tried to convince myself it was a deer, maybe a bear, even though I knew the rhythm was wrong. Too steady, too purposeful. The mantel clock now showed midnight and had stopped moving backwards. The hands frozen at 12 o'clock. My watch also showed midnight, and that's when I realized both clocks were right. It was midnight, but outside I could hear voices now, mixed with the footsteps. They were counting down. 10 9 8 The voices were wrong, layered and echoing, like dozens of people speaking in unison, and they were counting backwards, but they'd started at 10, and I couldn't remember hearing them start. 3 ... 1 ... and then silence. Complete, suffocating silence. The fire went out all at once. Not gradually, just gone, plunging the cabin into darkness. I fumbled for my phone, hands shaking, found the flashlight app wouldn't work on the dead battery. Then the scratching started on the door. Not knocking, not pounding, but scratching, like fingernails on wood, and it was coming from multiple places at once. The front door, the back door, the windows. The cabin groaned, and through the window, I saw them. Faces pressed against the glass, pale and expressionless, their mouths moving in that same countdown. 10, 8, ... They were starting over. The New Year's countdown, but backwards. Repeating, and every time they hit one, the scratching got louder, more frantic. I ran to the bedroom, locked the door, pushed furniture against it, and huddled in the corner with my useless phone gripped in my hands. The scratching turned to pounding. Wood splintered. I could hear them inside the cabin now, moving through the rooms, their feet shuffling on the hardwood floor, their voices chanting that backwards countdown over and over. 10, ... 9, ... 8 ... They were getting closer to the bedroom door. I don't remember much after that. The police found me 3 days later, on January 3rd, unconscious on the floor of that bedroom. The furniture was still piled against the door, but the door itself was untouched. No scratches, no damage. The cabin was pristine. The mantel clock showed the correct time and was running normally. They said I must have had a psychotic break, maybe carbon monoxide poisoning, but the cabin's co-detectors were all functioning. The owner never returned my calls. I looked up the property records later, and the cabin has had 17 different renters in the past 8 years, and every single one checked out early or had to be removed by emergency services. Here's the thing they don't tell you about the Appalachian Mountains. Time doesn't work the same way up there. There are places where midnight can last for hours, or repeat, or run backwards. And if you're unlucky enough to be in one of those places when the clock strikes 12 on New Year's Eve, you might find yourself stuck in a moment that never ends, counting down to something that will never arrive, surrounded by things that aren't quite people anymore. I still can't watch New Year's Eve countdowns, because I know what's counting down with them in cabins and hollows throughout those mountains, waiting for someone else to be there at midnight, waiting to start the countdown all over again. We thought hiking to the overlook for midnight would be romantic, something different. A story to tell our friends about how we rang in 2025 on top of a mountain in West Virginia with fireworks visible in the valley below. There were 4 of us, me, Sarah, Marcus, and Jen, and we'd been planning this trip for months. Checking weather patterns, studying trail maps, making sure we had the right gear for a winter night hike. What we didn't plan for was the fog that rolled in around 11 p.m. So thick it turned our headlamps into useless halos of light that barely penetrated 3 feet ahead. The trail to Seneca Overlook was supposed to be moderate difficulty. 3 miles. Up with an elevation gain of about 1,200 feet, well marked and maintained by the Park Service. We'd done harder hikes in daylight, so we figured we'd be fine with good lights and warm clothes. The first 2 miles went smoothly, cold but clear, our breath fogging in the air. The crunch of frozen leaves under our boots the only sound besides our occasional chatter. Marcus kept checking his GPS watch, calling out landmarks as we passed them, and everything was on schedule. We'd reach the overlook with 20 minutes to spare before midnight. Plenty of time to set up our cameras and catch the fireworks from 3 different towns in the valley. But then the fog came, rolling down from higher elevations like something alive, and within minutes, we couldn't see the trail markers anymore. Marcus's GPS watch started glitching, the screen flickering between our location and static, the coordinates jumping around randomly. "Just keep going up," Sarah said, and that made sense. The overlook was the high point. So as long as we were gaining elevation, we had to be headed the right way. We held on to each other's backpack straps, forming a chain so no one would get separated in the fog, and we climbed. The wrongness started small. Jen noticed it first. We'd been climbing for 20 minutes since the fog hit, but Marcus's watch said we'd only covered 400 feet of elevation, and that didn't match the burning in our legs or the steepness of the slope. GPS is just fucked from the fog, Marcus said, but his voice was uncertain. Then we found the tree. It was a massive oak, split down the middle by lightning, and Sarah swore we'd passed it 10 minutes ago. That's impossible, Marcus said. We've been going straight up the whole time, but when we kept climbing and found the same split oak 15 minutes later, none of us had an explanation that made sense. Stay with me here. Keep listening, and if you're enjoying these stories, hit that subscribe button, because what we found at the top of that mountain changed everything we thought we knew about New Year's Eve in Appalachia. You need to hear this. The fog was playing tricks on us, we decided, making us walk in circles somehow. We huddled together and checked our watchers. 11:47 p.m., 13 minutes to midnight. We could hear the first early fireworks from the valley, muffled and distant through the fog. Forget the overlook, Jen said. Let's just stop here and wait. Head out. But Marcus insisted we were close. We had to be close, and Sarah backed him up. I wanted to stop, but I didn't want to be the one to ruin everyone's plans, so we kept climbing. That's when we started hearing the other footsteps. At first, we thought it was an echo of our own boots on the frozen trail, but the rhythm was off, and the sounds were coming from ahead of us, not behind. Someone else was on the trail, climbing up through the fog. "Hey!" Marcus shouted. "Anyone up there?" The footsteps stopped. Then they started again, faster now, and we could hear breathing, heavy and ragged, like someone running uphill at full speed. The fog swirled, and shapes moved through it. Human shapes, but wrong somehow. Their proportions stretched and twisted. We ran, not down, because we'd lost track of which direction was down in the fog, but sideways, off the trail, crashing. Through underbrush and around trees. The footsteps followed, always just behind us, and we could hear them multiplying, more and more figures running through the fog, their breathing synchronized and inhuman. Jen screamed and pulled free from our chain, and before we could grab her, shit disappeared into the fog. We heard her scream once more, distant already, and then silence. Marcus's watch started beeping, midnight. The fireworks erupted in the valley below, and for a moment, the explosions of light penetrated the fog, turning it into a kaleidoscope of colors. And in that flickering illumination, we saw them, dozens of them, standing in a circle around us. Their bodies translucent in the fog, their faces frozen in expressions of terror or ecstasy, we couldn't tell which. They were wearing hiking clothes from different eras, different decades, their gear ranging from modern North Face to old wool coats and canvas packs. They'd all come up here for New Year's Eve. They'd all gotten lost in the fog, and now they were part of something else. One of them stepped forward, a woman in a 1970s-style parka, her eyes empty and black. She opened her mouth, and out came the sound of wind through hollow trees. And in that sound, we heard words: stay, celebrate, forever. The others moved closer, their hands reaching out, and we bolted. I don't know what happened to Sarah and Marcus. I broke away from them in the chaos, ran blindly through the fog until I collapsed from exhaustion against a tree. And I must have passed out because when I opened my eyes, it was dawn, and I was on a Park Service road 2 miles from where we'd started the hike. Search and rescue found Marcus 3 days later, wandering near a creek, incoherent and suffering from severe hypothermia. He doesn't speak anymore, just sits and stares at nothing, and on New Year's Eve, he starts crying. Sarah and Jen were never found. The fog on Seneca Mountain is a known phenomenon, park rangers told me. Happens every few years around major holidays. They warn people not to hike at night, not to go up there when the fog rolls in, but people don't listen. They want that perfect moment, that perfect view, and the mountain gives it to them in its own way. A New Year's celebration that never ends in the fog, surrounded by everyone else who came looking for the same thing. I hope Sarah and Jen found what they were looking for. I hope they're happy up there, because I don't think they're coming back. The church bells started ringing at 11:43 p.m., 17 minutes before midnight on New Year's Eve. And that's when I knew something was deeply wrong, because the church had been abandoned for 40 years and its bell had been removed decades ago. I was staying in a cabin near Cades Cove in the Smokies, a place I'd inherited from my grandmother who'd grown up in these mountains. Before the national park absorbed most of the settlements, she'd left me a letter with the deed, and in it, she'd written one warning. Don't listen to the bells after dark on New Year's Eve, if you hear them. Cover your ears and don't stop until dawn. I dismissed it as superstition, the kind of folk beliefs that run deep in Appalachian families, stories to scare children and tourists. But when those bells started ringing, clear and loud through the cold December night, I remembered her words. With sudden, visceral clarity. The cabin was isolated, 3 miles from the nearest maintained road, surrounded by forest that had been growing wild since the 1930s. The church, what was left of it, stood in a clearing about half a mile north. Its stone walls slowly crumbling, its roof long since collapsed. I'd hiked past it that afternoon, seen the empty bell tower, confirmed with my own eyes that there was nothing up there to ring. But the bells rang, a steady, rhythmic tolling, the same pattern over and over, and with each ring, I felt something shift in the air around me, like reality was flexing, adjusting to accommodate something that shouldn't exist. I tried to follow my grandmother's advice, pressed my hands over my ears, but the sound didn't come from outside. It resonated in my bones, in my teeth, in the space behind my eyes. It wasn't really sound at all, I realized. It was something older than sound, something that preceded the invention of bells. And the ringing was just the shape my mind gave it, because I needed to understand it as something my grandmother's letter had said more than just the warning. She'd included a history, fragments of stories passed down through generations. The church had been built in 1834 by a congregation that believed the mountains were holy, that God was present in the rocks and trees in a way he wasn't present in cities or lowlands. They rang the bell every night at midnight, a ritual to mark the boundary between one day and the next, to keep time sacred. On New Year's Eve, they rang it from midnight until dawn, a continuous prayer to carry them safely into the new year. Then came the winter of 1847, the year the snow fell for 40 days straight. And something came down from the higher peaks, something that had been sleeping in caves and forgotten hollows since before humans named these mountains. Stay with me. Here, keep listening. And if you're enjoying these stories, hit that subscribe button. Because this isn't just history, this is still happening, right now. In places where the old boundaries haven't been forgotten. Stay with me. The congregation tried to fight it with faith in bells, ringing that iron bell continuously, believing that sacred sound could drive back whatever darkness had awakened. But they misunderstood what they were dealing with. The thing that came down from the mountains didn't fear their bells. It fed on them, on the vibrations, on the intention behind each ring. It learned the pattern, the rhythm, the purpose, and on New Year's Eve, 1847, at midnight, when they rang the bells to welcome 1848, it answered. Nobody knows exactly what happened in that church. The few records that survived are vague and contradictory, written by people who refused to speak plainly about what they'd seen. But when spring finally came and the snow melted, the church was empty. All 63 members of the congregation were gone. The bell was still in the tower, and when the first explorers entered, they found it swinging, ringing on its own. And when they tried to stop it, it rang louder. So they left it. They let it ring itself out, and eventually, it stopped. The church was abandoned, condemned, forgotten. The bell was supposed to have been removed in 1915, melted down for the war effort, but the men who came to take it reported that touching it caused seizures, hallucinations, and one of them died when his heart simply stopped while he was climbing. The tower. Now on New Year's Eve, the bell rings again. Not the physical bell, that's gone, probably melted or buried or corroded to nothing, but the echo of it, the resonance it left behind, the pattern it learned in 1847. And if you're in these mountains when it starts ringing, you have two choices. Cover your ears and wait for dawn, or follow the sound to its source. Most people choose wrong. I chose wrong. The ringing pulled at me, a compulsion I couldn't resist. And before I consciously decided to move, I was out the cabin door, walking through the forest toward the church ruins. The night was clear and cold, stars bright overhead, my breath frosting in the air. The ringing grew louder with each step, and I could see other people now, walking through the trees from different directions, all converging on the clearing. They were dressed wrong, some in modern clothes, but others in older garments, decades out of date, and some in the simple homespun of the 19th century. They didn't acknowledge each other or me. Their eyes were fixed forward, their faces blank, and they walked in perfect rhythm with the bells. We gathered in the clearing around the church ruins. Dozens of us, maybe hundreds, standing in concentric circles around the empty bell tower. The ringing reached a crescendo at exactly midnight. I knew it was midnight without checking, felt it in my marrow, and then it stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the ringing, a vacuum that pulled at thought and breath and the steady beat of my heart. The bell tower began to glow, not with light, but with an absence of darkness, and something moved in that glow. Something that had been waiting since 1847 for enough people to hear the bells and answer the call. I don't remember what I saw. My mind won't hold the image, slides off it like water off oil. But I remember the feeling, recognition, like meeting something I'd always known but had spent my whole life trying to forget. And I remember the others, all of us standing in that clearing, beginning to move in unison, swaying to a rhythm that only existed in the spaces between moments. We were going to ring the bells ourselves, I understood. We were going to continue the ritual that had never really stopped, that had been running in the background of reality for 178 years, waiting for New Year's Eve to come around again. I broke free, I don't know how. Some part of me that was still my grandmother's granddaughter, still connected to these mountains in a way that predated the church and its cursed bells, kicked in and pulled me back. I ran, stumbled through the forest, fell and crawled and ran. Again until I reached the cabin. I locked myself inside, covered my ears with pillows and blankets, and I hummed, any sound, any noise to fill the silence in my head where the bells had been. I hummed until my throat was raw, until dawn light finally filtered through the windows. The others are still there, in that clearing, ringing bells that don't exist. keeping time for something that should never have been called into this world. If you go to Cade's Cove on New Year's Eve, if you stay past dark, you might hear them. Old-timers in the area know better than to be out there when midnight comes. They lock their doors, close their windows, and they make noise, any noise, to drown out the sound of bells that echo across more than a century. Because once you hear them, really hear them, a part of you stays in that clearing forever, waiting for the next New Year's Eve, waiting to ring in something that should have been left sleeping in the mountains. I sold my grandmother's cabin. I'll never go back. But on New Year's Eve, no matter where I am, I can still hear them, faint and distant, ringing in my bones. And every year, they get a little bit louder. My phone rang at 11:11 p.m. on New Year's Eve, which was weird because I was in the middle of nowhere, Kentucky with no cell signal, and I'd turned the damn thing off 3 hours ago to conserve battery. I was camped in my truck at a trailhead off Route 15, planning to sleep there and hit the trail at dawn, avoiding the New Year's Eve craziness in town. The nearest cell tower was probably 30 miles away, and I'd lost signal around sunset. But there it was, my phone screen glowing in the dark cab, showing an incoming call from a number I didn't recognize, all zeros. Just a string of zeros where the number should be. I let it ring. Basic rule of modern life: don't answer strange calls. Especially not when you're alone in the mountains with no way to call for help if things go wrong. But it kept ringing, that standard iPhone ringtone that usually stops after about 20 seconds. This didn't stop. It rang for a full minute, then 2, and the sound started to change, distorting, like the ringtone was degrading, turning into something organic and wrong. Finally, I answered, just to make it stop. Hello? Silence on the other end. Not empty silence, but full silence. The kind where you can hear the space on the other side, hear that someone is there, listening. Then a voice, my exact voice, said, "You should have stayed in town. It's going to be a long countdown." I hung up immediately, my hands shaking. Scam calls, I told myself. Some new AI voice cloning thing, probably scraped my voice from social media or YouTube videos. Creepy, but explainable. I turned the phone off again, this time removing the battery. Old phone. One of the few where you still could, and I tried to settle back in my sleeping bag. Outside the truck, the forest was dark and quiet. No wind, no animal sounds. Just the kind of stillness that makes you aware of your own breathing. That's when the knocking started. 3 knocks on the driver's side window, deliberate and measured. I grabbed my flashlight, pointed it at the window, but there was nothing there, just darkness and the reflection of my own startled face in the glass. The knocking came again, this time on the passenger window, then the back window, then the rear door. It was circling the truck, this invisible knocker, and with each round, the knocks got faster, more urgent, until it sounded like dozens of hands pounding on the metal from all sides. I turned on the headlights, flooded the area around my truck with light, and I saw footprints in the thin layer of snow that had fallen earlier. Dozens of footprints, all converging on my truck, all leading to the doors and windows, but none leading away. The pounding stopped. The phone, still batteryless, still supposedly off, rang again. I watched it vibrate on the passenger's seat, the screen lighting up even though that should have been impossible. And this time, multiple calls were coming through simultaneously, the screen flashing with different numbers, all of them strings of the same digit repeated. All 1 south, all 2 south, all 3 south, like a countdown. I didn't answer, just stared at the phone in horror as the calls kept coming. All 4 south, all 5 south. My voice came through the speaker, even though I hadn't answered. You can't hide. In there forever. Midnight is coming. Stay with me here. Keep listening. And if you're enjoying these stories, hit that subscribe button, because what happened next is why I'll never spend New Year's Eve alone in the mountains again. You need to understand this. All 6 south, all 7 south. The calls were counting up, and I realized with sick certainty that when they hit all 9 south, when the countdown was complete, something would happen. Something bad. I started the truck, hands fumbling with the keys, and I threw it into reverse, backing away from the trailhead toward the main road. The headlights swept across the forest, and that's when I saw them, figures standing between. The trees, dozens of them, all perfectly still, all watching my truck. They looked human from a distance, but as the lights hit them, I could see they were wrong. Their proportions were off, limbs too long, heads tilted at angles that should have broken necks, and they were all holding phones, all with the screens glowing, all pointed at me like cameras or weapons, all 8 south. The truck stuttered, engine cutting out, and no matter how many times I turned the key, it wouldn't start again. The battery was fine, the tank was full, but something was preventing the ignition from catching. Through the windshield, I watched the figures move closer, stepping out from behind trees. Their movements synchronized and jerky, like bad stop-motion animation. They were still holding their phones, and in unison, they raised them higher, and my phone, my impossible, battery-less phone, rang with all 9 south. I answered. What else could I do? All of them spoke at once, and it was my voice multiplied 100 times, a chorus of me saying, Happy New Year. You're invited to the party. Everyone's invited. You just have to answer the call. And then, from every phone, I heard a countdown starting. 10, 9, 8, The New Year's countdown, but it was hours too early. We were still minutes from midnight, but they didn't care. They were creating their own midnight, their own New Year, and I was the guest of honor. 3, 1. At 1, every phone screen went dark simultaneously, and so did my truck's dashboard lights, and the headlights died, and I was in complete darkness. The figures rushed the truck. I could hear them swarming over the hood and roof, their hands pressed against every window, and they were all laughing, dozens of voices laughing in perfect sync. And underneath the laughter, I could hear more phones ringing, more calls coming in, thousands of them, millions, every phone in the world ringing at once, all trying to reach me. I don't remember everything that happened next. The police report says I was found at dawn on January 1st, sitting in my truck with all the doors and windows open, covered in snow, my body temperature so low I should have been dead. My phone was in my hand, and it had 1,847 missed calls, all from different numbers, all left voicemails. The cops played the first few, just static and heavy breathing, and then they stopped playing them because one of the officers started crying and couldn't explain why. They deleted them all, said it was evidence tampering, but they didn't care. They just wanted them gone. Here's what I know now. There are things in these mountains that have learned to use our technology, learned to speak our language, learned to mimic our voices. They're old, older than cell phones or electricity, but they're adaptable. And they're lonely, I think, isolated in these hollows and peaks. And New Year's Eve is when they reach out, when the boundary between years is thin enough for them to make contact. They call and call, trying to connect, trying to bring people into their eternal celebration of midnight. Most people don't answer. But if you're alone in the mountains on New Year's Eve and your phone rings, even if it shouldn't have signal, even if you've turned it off, even if the battery is dead, don't answer. Because they're very good at mimicking voices. They'll sound exactly like someone you know, someone you trust, someone you love, and once you answer, once you engage with the call, they have a connection to you that never fully breaks. My phone still rings sometimes, random times, random days, always when I'm alone. I never answer anymore, but I can hear them through the speaker even when I don't pick up, hear my own voice on the other end, counting down to a midnight that never comes. Happy New Year. Don't answer the calls. I was 30 feet underground in a cave system near the Virginia-Tennessee border when I heard the party starting, which made no sense because I was in a section of the cave that wasn't open to the public, and I'd specifically chosen this place to be alone for New Year's Eve, after a brutal divorce and a worse year. I wanted silence and darkness and the kind of isolation that helps you reset, and the Appalachian cave systems offered exactly that. I had a permit for solo caving, proper gear, years of experience, and a plan to spend midnight in the cathedral chamber, a massive limestone room 300 feet below the surface where I could sit in perfect darkness and let one year become another without fireworks or crowds or forced celebration. The party sounds echoed through the passages, voices, laughter, music that sounded tinny and distorted by distance. My first thought was other cavers had come down, despite the permit system, probably college kids looking for an extreme place to ring in the new year. Annoying, but not dangerous. I followed the sounds, planning to politely inform them they were trespassing and needed to leave. The acoustics in caves are tricky, and what sounds close can be far away. What sounds like many voices can be just one person and echoes. But these sounds were getting louder, clearer, and I wasn't moving toward them. They were moving toward me. I reached the cathedral chamber earlier than planned, my headlamp cutting through the absolute darkness to illuminate the vast space. Stalactites hung from the ceiling 60 feet above. Stalagmites rose from the floor like stone trees, and in the center of the chamber, there was a party. 20, maybe 30 people, dressed in a mix of clothing from different eras, all arranged in a circle, around a pile of something that might have been wood or might have been bones. They were singing, not in English, not in any language I recognized, and as my light swept across them, none of them reacted. They didn't turn to look at me, didn't pause in their song, didn't acknowledge my presence at all. I should have left immediately. Every instinct screamed at me to run back up the passage, climb out of the cave, and call the authorities. But I was frozen, watching them, because something about the scene was fundamentally impossible. Some of these people were transparent, flickering like old film projections, and the pile in the center of their circle was burning with a flame that gave off no smoke and cast no heat. They were celebrating something, their voices rising and falling in rhythm, their bodies swaying in unison, and the longer I watched, the more I understood that they'd been celebrating for a very, very long time. Stay with me here, keep listening, and if you're enjoying these stories, hit that subscribe button. Because what I'm about to tell you about that cave, about what lives in the deep places of these mountains, is something that changes how you think about everything. Stay with me. My watch said 11:37 p.m., 23 minutes until midnight. The singing people moved their circle, a slow rotation around the burning pile. And in their movement, I saw others, bodies, or the shapes of bodies, hard to tell in the flickering knot light of that impossible fire. They were lying around the edges of the chamber, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, and I realized with horror that some of them were recent. Modern clothes, modern gear. Other cavers? Other people who'd come down here on New Year's Eve seeking solitude or adventure or the perfect place to celebrate. And they'd found this gathering instead. One of the figures in the circle turned to look at me, actually turned, its head rotating a full 180 degrees while its body continued moving forward, and it smiled. Its teeth were too many and too sharp, and its eyes reflected my headlamp like an animal's eyes. That green shine that means something has a tapetum lucidum, that means it's designed to see in the dark. "Welcome," it said, and its voice carried perfectly through the chamber despite the bad acoustics. "You're just in time for the countdown." I ran. The passage I'd entered through was the only way out. Caves don't have back doors, and I ran toward it. While behind me, the singing changed, got louder, more urgent, and I could hear footsteps following, the slap of bare feet on wet stone. My headlamp bounced wildly, shadows lurching and dancing on the limestone walls, and I thought I was going to make it, thought I'd reach the main passage and somehow outrun whatever was behind me. Then my light went out. Complete darkness. The kind of darkness that doesn't exist on the surface, where there's always some ambient light from stars or cities or the moon. This was the darkness at the center of the earth, absolute and suffocating, and in that darkness, I could hear them. Surrounding me, could feel their breath on my face, could sense bodies pressing close on all sides. The singing had become a chant, words in that unknown language, and I realized they were counting down. Dick, Nev, ... okay, ... numbers, maybe, or something like numbers, and they were getting lower, building towards something. Hands grabbed me, cold. Dry hands with too many joints, and they pulled me back toward the cathedral chamber, dragged me across the stone floor while I kicked and screamed and fought, and nothing I did mattered. They were impossibly strong, and there were so many of them, and my light was still out, and in the darkness, I couldn't tell what was human and what wasn't. Couldn't tell if the hands pulling me belonged to the transparent singers or to something else that lived in these caves. They threw me into the circle, and the knot fire blazed brighter, and I could see again. Wish I couldn't. Wish I'd stayed in darkness, because what I saw was worse. The pile in the center wasn't wood or bones, it was years. Literally years, somehow made physical, stacked and burning, decades and centuries of time that had been collected and hoarded and were now being consumed. The singers weren't people. They were the idea of people, archetypes, the Platonic ideal of celebration given form, and they'd been here since humans first learned to mark the passage of time. Since the first New Year was celebrated somewhere in the darkness of prehistory. Try ... do ... unu ... The countdown reached its end, and my watch said midnight, and they all looked at me with those reflecting eyes, and they sang a terrible song of welcome and imprisonment, and I understood that I was supposed to stay. I was supposed to join the circle, add my own celebrations to theirs, feed my ears to the fire, and continue the ritual that had been going on for millennia in caves and deep places around the world. Every New Year's Eve, someone had to be here. Someone had to celebrate with them. And this year, it was me. I don't remember how I got out. The rescue team found me 2 days later, half a mile from the cave entrance, suffering from severe hypothermia and dehydration. I'd somehow climbed out and wandered into the forest, and I couldn't explain how because I had no memory of the ascent, no memory of anything after midnight. My gear was never found. Neither were the other bodies I'd seen in that chamber. The cave was closed and investigated, and officials said they found no evidence of human presence beyond the expected formations and wildlife. But I know what I saw. I know what lives in those caves, in the deep places of the Appalachian Mountains. In the darkness below the earth where time pools and collects and becomes something tangible. And I know that every New Year's Eve, somewhere in those caves, the celebration continues. People go missing in these mountains every year, especially around holidays. Some get lost, some fall, some meet animals or weather. But some, I think, find parties they never wanted to attend, celebrations that never end, countdown rituals in the dark that have been going on since before we had words for year or new or beginning. I'll never go underground on New Year's Eve again. I'll never even go near the mountains, because once you've been invited to their party, once you've heard their countdown, they remember you. And they're very patient. They can wait. They have all the time in the world, literally piled up and burning in chambers deep below the surface. And one day, maybe years from now, maybe decades, I'll hear that chant again, those numbers counting, down in a language older than English, and I'll know they've come to collect their guest. Happy New Year. May you celebrate it on the surface, in the light, far from the places where time goes to burn. The snow started falling at 9 p.m. on December 31st, 2024. Big wet flakes that stuck to everything and accumulated fast. And by 10 p.m., I couldn't see my rental car anymore through the window of the cabin I'd rented in North Carolina's high country. I wasn't worried. The forecast had predicted snow. I had supplies for several days, and the cabin had a backup generator and plenty of firewood. What did worry me was the way the snow was falling. Perfectly vertical, no wind, no drift, just straight down like it was being poured from something directly overhead, and the flakes all seemed to be the same size, the same shape, falling in a pattern that was almost geometric. I'd come to the mountains to finish my novel, needed isolation and silence to push through the final chapters, and this cabin, 3 miles down a private road. No neighbors, no Wi-Fi, just me and the mountains was perfect. The owner had mentioned in passing that the place had character, which I'd interpreted as charming quirks, maybe old pipes or creaky floors. What he hadn't mentioned was that every surface in the cabin was decorated with snow globes, shelves full of them, windowsills lined with them, dozens of snow globes featuring cabins and winter scenes, all nearly identical to the cabin I was sitting in. I'd thought it was kitschy, a weird theming choice, but looking at them now while the snow fell outside in that too-perfect pattern, I felt deeply uneasy. At 11 p.m., I noticed the discrepancy. My phone? No signal, but still keeping time, said 11:04. My laptop said 11:04. But the antique clock on the mantle said 9:47, and when I checked it against my devices, I realized it was running slow, losing about 2 minutes every 10 minutes. Not a battery issue. I'd watched the second hand move, and it was moving at a normal pace, but somehow, the time it was showing was falling further and further behind. More troubling. When I looked out the window, the snow had accumulated to about 6 inches on the deck railing. But according to when it started falling and how fast it was coming down, there should have been at least twice that much. I went to the door to check, needed to see for myself, and when I opened it, the cold that hit me was wrong. Not just cold, but absence warmth, like the air itself had been drained of heat, and the snow wasn't wet anymore. It was dry, powdery, and when I reached out to touch it, my hand passed through the surface like it was touching fog or projection. Underneath the illusion of snow was glass, smooth, curved glass, extending up and around, and I understood with sudden, terrible clarity that I wasn't looking out at the mountains anymore. I was looking at the inside of a sphere. Stay with me here. Keep listening. And if you're enjoying these stories, hit that subscribe button. Because what I'm about to tell you about that cabin, about what happens when reality folds in on itself, in the Appalachian Mountains on New Year's Eve, will change how you see the world. You need to hear this. I stumbled back inside, slammed the door, and grabbed one of the snow globes from the nearest shelf. Inside it was a perfect miniature of the cabin I was in, and in the window of the miniature cabin, I could see a tiny figure. That might have been me, holding a tiny snow globe. I shook the globe, watched the artificial snow swirl, and outside the real windows, the snow began to swirl in exactly the same pattern, responding to my movement. I was inside the snow globe. Somehow, impossibly, I was inside one of the decorations. The clock on the mantel now showed 8:15, running backward faster than it had run forward, and I realized time wasn't just moving slowly in here, it was reversing. Pulling back toward some earlier point, and when it reached that point, whatever that point was, something would happen. I looked at my phone. 11:38 p.m. 22 minutes until midnight, until New Year's, until something. I tried the door again, but it wouldn't open now. Not stuck or locked, but simply not a door anymore. Just a painting of a door on the wall, flat and unreachable. The cabin began to shake. Not like an earthquake, but like someone was picking up the snow globe I was trapped in and shaking it. And through the windows, I watched the artificial snow fly upward, swirl in patterns, settle down. Each time it settled, the scene outside changed slightly. The trees were in different positions. The mountains had different shapes. The color of the night sky shifted through subtle variations of black and blue and purple. Someone was playing with my prison, experimenting, seeing how the scene looked from different angles. And I was the tiny figure trapped inside. Helpless, I smashed one of the decorative snow globes against the floor, desperate to break whatever. Connection was keeping me here, and when the glass shattered, pain lanced through my skull like someone had driven an ice pick into my brain. Outside the window, cracks appeared in the sky, spreading across the dome of glass or whatever it was that surrounded me. And through the cracks, I saw something beyond, not stars, not night, but an eye. An enormous eye, looking in at me, studying me, and I realized this wasn't some natural phenomenon, wasn't some weird pocket of reality. This was deliberate. Something had collected me, put me in its snow globe, added me to its collection. The clock struck midnight, actually chimed, a sound it hadn't made before, and the eye blinked. The cracks in the sky healed. The cabin stopped shaking. Everything went silent and still, and for a moment, I thought maybe it was over, maybe whatever. This had passed. Then the door opened, the real door, now working again, and standing in the doorway was me, another me. It walked into the cabin, looked around with an expression of satisfaction, and sat down at my laptop to work on the novel. It didn't acknowledge me at all, didn't seem to see me, and I realized I wasn't in the cabin anymore, not really. I was in the snow globe version, the miniature, and this new version of me was in the real cabin, taking my place. I'm writing this from inside the globe, though I don't know how these words will reach anyone outside. Time moves differently in. Here, I've lived through New Year's Eve 47 times now. Always the same sequence, always ending with that midnight chime and another version of me walking in to take my place. The cabin outside has been rented 47 more times since I disappeared. and each time, the new renter finds it decorated with snow globes, and one of those globes contains me. And I watch them through the distorted glass, trying to warn them, trying to scream that they need to leave before midnight, but no sound escapes this prison. The thing that did this, the thing with the enormous eye, is still out there, still collecting. I've seen other snow globes on the shelves in here, miniature. Prisons containing other people, other cabins, other moments frozen and repeated forever. There's a man in one, trying to chop wood that never splits. A woman in another, reading the same page of a book over and over. A family in a third, sitting at a dinner table with food that never gets eaten. We're all decorations now, all part of someone's collection. And New Year's Eve is when it hunts. When the boundary between reality and miniature is thinnest. When it can reach into the world and pluck out anyone who's alone in the mountains. Anyone isolated enough to be taken without others noticing immediately. If you rent a cabin in the Appalachian Mountains for New Year's Eve, check the decorations. If you see snow globes, dozens of them, all showing scenes that look too real, too detailed, get out. Don't stay until midnight. Don't let yourself be collected. Because I can see you through the glass, all of you who come to these cabins looking for peace and isolation, and I'm screaming warnings you can't hear. And one by one, more globes appear on the shelves, more people join the collection, and the thing with the enormous eye just keeps watching, keeps collecting, keeps playing with its toys. Happy New Year. I hope you spend it somewhere real. I hope you're not already inside the globe, just learning the pattern. It's beginning to understand that you're going to ring in the new year forever, again and again, trapped in someone else's decoration, while a new version of you takes your place in the world above. The snow is falling again. The clock is running backwards. Midnight is coming, and I know exactly what happens next. I summited Clingman's Dome at 11:17 p.m. on New Year's Eve, the highest point in the Great Smoky Mountains, 6,643 feet above sea level, and as I stood on the observation tower at the peak, I could see fires burning on every other mountaintop in the range, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, arranged in a pattern that was too perfect to be natural. I'd hiked up in darkness, drawn by something I couldn't explain, a compulsion that had started 3 days earlier when I'd first entered the park. The fires called to me, and I'd answered, and now, looking out at the ocean of darkness and flame, I understood I'd made a terrible mistake. The observation tower was deserted, the park officially closed for the holiday, but I wasn't alone. Others had come up the mountain, drawn by the same inexplicable pull, and we stood on the concrete ramp that spiraled up the tower. Maybe 20 of us, all looking out at the fires, all silent. Nobody spoke, nobody asked questions, because we all knew, somehow, that speaking would break whatever spell had brought us here. And breaking the spell would be worse than maintaining it. The fires burned in a pattern. I could see it from this height, the way they were arranged in concentric circles radiating out from where we stood. And at the center of the pattern was Clingman's Dome, was this tower, was us. My phone said 11:34 p.m., 26 minutes until midnight, until the new year, until something else that I understood without being told. The fires were counting down, I realized. Every few minutes, one would go out, extinguished by something or someone, and the pattern would tighten, the circles contracting inward. We were at the center of a massive countdown, a ritual that involved every peak in the Smokies, every mountaintop that could sustain a fire. And when the last fire went out, when only the center remained, something would happen here. On this tower, to us. I tried to leave. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to run down the mountain, get to my car, drive away before midnight came. But my legs wouldn't move. None of us could move, I realized, looking at the others on the tower. We were frozen in place, our bodies locked into position, our eyes forced to watch the fires go out one by one. We were witnesses, or sacrifices, or both, and the mountains had been preparing for this for longer than I could comprehend. The Smokies are old, older than human civilization, older than the last ice age. Mountains that have been standing for 300 million years, and they remember things that predate memory. Knowledge that exists in stone and root and the slow geological processes that built these peaks. Stay with me here. Keep listening, and if you're enjoying these stories, hit that subscribe button. Because what I'm about to tell you about these mountains, about what wakes up at midnight on New Year's Eve, is the truth that the old-timers know but never speak about. This is what they're really afraid of when they warn people not to be on the peaks after dark. Stay with me. 11:48 p.m. 12 minutes. The fires were going out faster now, the pattern collapsing inward, and I could see figures moving between the peaks. Massive figures, taller than the trees, striding across the ridges with steps that covered miles. They were putting out the fires, completing the countdown, and they were getting closer to us with each extinguished flame. The other people on the tower began to change. Their bodies elongated, stretched upward, their arms extending into branches, their legs rooting into the concrete, and I realized we weren't witnesses. We were becoming part of the mountains, transformed into new peaks, new high points, living towers that would stand here for another 300 million years. Frozen in this moment of transition between one year and the next, I felt it happening to me. My feet had merged with the floor of the observation tower, my bones hardening into something like stone, my thoughts slowing down, spreading out, becoming less human and more geological. It wasn't painful, exactly, but it was terrifying in a way that transcended fear, a fundamental wrongness of being changed into something I wasn't meant to be. Through the transformation, I could still see the fires, still count them going out. 17 left, 13, 8, 5. The massive figures were visible now, not quite giants, not quite anything with a name, just presences that had always been part of these mountains, manifestations of the stone itself, and they were coming to complete the ritual. 11:59 p.m. 1 minute. The last fire went out, not the one on Klingman's dome, not where we stood, but the final outer fire, the last sentinel, and now all that remained was us, the ones at the center, and we were burning. Not with flame, but with something older than fire, a transformation that had been building for centuries, maybe millennia, waiting for the right moment, the right group of people drawn to the right place at the right time. We were the midnight fire, the final flame, and when the clock struck 12, when 2024 became 2025, we would complete the mountain's new year, would mark the transition with our transformation, would become permanent fixtures of this landscape. The figures reached the tower. I could see them now, really see them, and they were made of stone and tree and ancient compressed life, fossils and sediment and time made mobile, and they stood around the observation tower like worshippers around an altar, and they watched us burn with expressions that might have been satisfaction or hunger or something that had no human equivalent. One of them reached out, its arm extending impossible distances, and touched the tower, and the concrete cracked, splintered, began to grow, shooting upward, taking us with it, lifting us higher and higher above the landscape. Midnight, the clock struck, though there was no clock, the midnight existing independent of timepieces. A fundamental shift in reality that I felt in my rapidly changing form. And then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The figures vanished, dissolving back into the mountains, gained new peaks. Small ones, usually spires and outcroppings that appear overnight, that geologists attribute to erosion or shifting earth or other natural processes. But they're not natural. They're people. Hikers and tourists and locals who were drawn to the high peaks on New Year's Eve, who stood at the center of the countdown, who were transformed into stone to mark the mountain's new year. The peaks have names now, given by park services who don't understand what they're naming. Mount Gao, Tricorner, Knob, Siler's Bald. Behind each name is a person who used to exist, who now exists as geography, as a permanent feature of the landscape. I was lucky. I got away. But every New Year's Eve, I feel the pull again, the urge to return to the mountains, to climb to the high places, to stand at the center of the countdown. The mountains remember me, I think. They marked me as potential material. And they're patient, and eventually, maybe years from now, maybe decades, I won't be able to resist. I'll climb up to Klingman's Dome or one of the other high peaks, and I'll stand there as the fires begin to burn, and I'll watch the countdown complete. And next time, I won't escape the transformation. Next time, I'll become what the mountains want me to become. A new high point, a new elevation, a new name on a map that hikers will summit without knowing they're walking on someone who used to be human. Happy New Year. May you celebrate it far from the high places, far from the peaks that grow taller every December 31st, far from the mountains that count down to transformations older than time. Because I can't? I can feel them pulling at me even now, calling me home, promising that next year, next New Year's Eve, I'll finally understand what it means to stop being temporary flesh and become permanent stone. The countdown never really ends. It just resets, waiting for midnight to come around again.